Jonathan Ray shows how Hazlitt was initially attracted to the progressive optimism of thinkers like Priestley and Godwin, and how his later disenchantment with them led him to rethink the fate of modern philosophy.
From an early age, William Hazlitt showed a rare talent for happiness. He delighted his parents by managing to enjoy himself during their tribulations in Ireland and America, and when they were back in England, trying to adjust to the slow pace of life in the Shropshire village of Wem, the 9-year-old William seems to have been the only member of the family who contrived to keep his spirits up. He was the most active, lively and happiest of boys, according to his elder sister Peggy, and beloved of all for his amiable temper and manners. His father, the Reverend William Hazlitt, was minister at the Unitarian Chapel in Wem, and ran a little school where he offered elementary lessons in Latin, mathematics, history and English poetry to the boys of the village, including young William, who seems to have applied himself to his studies with the same blithe energy he brought to kite-flying, sketching, gardening and roaming for hours on end through the surrounding fields and hills. William was proud of his father as a man of learning and principle, and he loved listening to his sermons and discussing politics with him. When he was 12, he was sent off to spend a couple of months as the guest of a prosperous Unitarian family in Liverpool, and they took him to concerts and plays and French lessons, and even to an Anglican church. "I do not care if I should never go into one again," Hazlitt said rather priggishly in one of his letters home, and went on to reassure his father about how he passed a typical Sunday. "I spent a very agreeable day," he wrote, "as I heard 2 good sermons and read 160 pages of Priestley." Joseph Priestley was an intellectual hero to dissenters in general, especially to Unitarians, and to none more than to William Hazlitt Sr. His reputation was founded on his work as a natural scientist, but he was interested in science not just for its own sake, but as an emblem of what he called perpetual progress and improvement in human affairs. "The rapid progress of knowledge," he wrote, "will be the means, under God, of extirpating all error and prejudice, and all the efforts of corrupt establishments will be ineffectual in this enlightened age." Priestley's optimism had sustained Mr. Hazlitt through numerous discouragements, and for a while it enthralled young William as well. Indeed, when Priestley's house and laboratory in Birmingham were ransacked in the name of Church and King, he sent off a precociously dignified letter to the editor of the Shrewsbury Chronicle.
"'Tis really surprising that men too that aspire to the character of Christians, should take pleasure in endeavouring to load with infamy one of the best, one of the wisest, and one of the greatest of men. Ah, Christianity, how art thou debased! How am I grieved to see that universal benevolence, that love to all mankind, that love even to our enemies, contracted and shrunk up within the narrow limits that prejudice and bigotry mark out. Religious persecution is the bane of all religion, and the friends of persecution are the worst enemies religion has."
Nothing could have delighted Mr. Hazlitt more than this display of Unitarian eloquence from his 13-year-old boy, which seemed to presage a future career as a formidable propagandist for rational Christianity. Within a few months, however, young William had become a different person. He was transformed, in the words of a friend of the family, from one of the most entertaining and prepossessing children ever seen into a glowering, thunderous youth who was constantly taking offence and picking quarrels, muttering imprecations about liberty and the rights of man, and storming off to shut himself up in his bedroom for hours on end. Many years later, his sister would put it all down to over-exertion, but Hazlitt saw it differently. This was, he claimed, the first time I ever attempted to think. For more than a year, the little house in Wem was at the mercy of the boy's moods, as he struggled to work out what he thought of Priestley and politics. But in September 1793, to everyone's relief, he went off to study at Hackney New College, a well-endowed Unitarian institution east of London, near where Homerton Hospital now stands. He'd be joining a community of 50 or 60 scholars and half a dozen masters to receive a university-level education based on the principles of rational Christianity. 3 years of liberal arts followed by a 2-year training in Unitarian theory. The annual fee of 60 guineas was far beyond the means of Mr. Hazlitt. It was more than twice his salary, but it was covered by a bursary from a fund for dissenting ministers, and Mr. Hazlitt had good grounds for hoping that his son would receive the intellectual nourishment he seemed to crave, and eventually recover his former confidence and good cheer. Hazlitt must have been terrified when he arrived at Hackney College. He was only 15, probably the youngest student there, and he was alone amongst complete strangers for the first time in his life. But his fellow students were friendly, and as fervent about radical causes as he could have wished. The scholarly side of things was not too daunting either. The classes were very small, sometimes only 2 or 3 students. The masters were young, lenient, and inquisitive, and they often let their lectures turn into free discussions of politics and philosophy. The headmaster of Hackney New College was a Unitarian minister called Thomas Belsham, who designed the entire curriculum on the basis of modern philosophy, and in particular what he called the philosophy of mind, a peculiarly British discipline, as Belsham saw it, first explored by John Locke just over a century before, and brought to a kind of perfection by a medical doctor called David Hartley, whose ideas had been turned into a clear and compact system by the admirable Joseph Priestley. The leading doctrine of the philosophy of mind was the association of ideas, or the theory that there's nothing to human passions and beliefs, even at their most subtle, refined, or sublime, except sequences of ideas, derived one by one from our bodily senses and then grouped together or associated into the regular, recognizable patterns that fill our consciousness and are then recognized as representations of a so-called external world. David Hartley had given a materialist spin to the doctrine by identifying ideas with diminutive vibrations in the brain, or vibratiuncles, as he called them, and reducing associations to their physiological interactions, no more dependent on our awareness or voluntary control than digestion or the circulation of the blood. Our minds and personalities, in short, indeed our very selves, were no more than passive creatures of circumstance. The doctrine of association left no room for traditional theological notions like free will or divine intervention or the autonomous, immortal, immaterial soul. But as far as Hartley was concerned, it chimed perfectly with the pure religion of Christ. It washed away the impostures of priestcraft to reveal the great apparatus of nature, a set of mechanisms which, by linking our minds into progressively vaster networks of association, ensured that our intellectual capacities would never cease to improve, bringing us closer and closer to the pure and complete happiness that Jesus had taught us to expect. Thomas Belsham considered that Hartley's philosophy of mind, perfected by Priestley, was now established beyond the possibility of controversy. And as headmaster of Hackney New College, he took personal responsibility for disseminating the doctrine to all his scholars. Belsham's lectures cannot have contained many surprises for William Hazlitt, who'd been steeped in Priestley for many years, but he did not find them persuasive. A few weeks after starting at Hackney, he was required to write a theme for one of his tutors, but when it was time to hand it in, he turned up empty-handed. "Why, really, sir," he explained, "I could not write it." His tutor, a sympathetic young man called John Corrie, told him to come back with something within the hour, but he failed once again, as he explained in a letter to his family back in Wem.
I assumed as sullen a countenance as I could, intimating that he had not treated me well. But as I was going away, he called me back and asked me very mildly if I had never written anything. I answered that I had written several things, on which he desired me to let him see one of my compositions, if I had no objection. I immediately took him my essay on Priestley and laws and gave it to him. When he had read it, he asked me a few questions on the subject, which I answered very satisfactorily, I believe. "Well, sir," says he, "I wish you'd write some more such things as this. Take your own time now, I shall not ask for it, only write it as soon as you can." This he repeated once or twice. On this I wished him a good morning, and came away very well pleased.
For the rest of his time at Hackney, Hazlitt would spend an hour or two each day labouring over his own writing, but to little immediate effect. The all-embracing certitudes of Hartley's philosophy of mind were becoming wearisome, and it struck him that the world that delights and nurtures us has a kind of fused integrity that could never be accounted for by vibratiuncles in the brain, or by separate ideas drifting into association with each other, and that thinking must be more than a matter of stringing different sensations together, like beads on a piece of string.
We may go on multiplying and combining sensations to the end of time without producing one single thought. I confess I feel in reading Hartley something in the way in which the Dryads must have done, shut up in their old oak trees. I feel my sides pressed hard and bored with points of knotty inferences, without being able ever to recollect myself or catch a glimpse of the actual world outside me.
Hazlitt sought relief from his doubts by venturing out into the murky world of radical London, where he had the extraordinary honour of meeting William Godwin, then at the very height of his fame. Wherever liberty, truth, justice was the theme, he noted, his name was not far off. But Godwin was a disappointment. His mind seemed to work like a vast steam engine, with valves to regulate the quantity of gas, and generating enormous volumes of vapid, mechanistic optimism.
Man was indeed screwed up by mood and figure into a logical machine that was to forward the public good with the utmost punctuality and effect. Mr. Godwin gives no quarter to the amiable weaknesses of our nature, nor does he stoop to avail himself of the supplementary aids of an imperfect virtue. Gratitude, promises, friendship, family affection give way, that the void may be filled by disinterested love of the good.
If anyone could have salvaged Hazlitt's confidence in rational Christianity, it would have been the inimitable Joseph Priestley, who happened to be in London at the time making plans for emigration to Pennsylvania. And by a strange stroke of fortune, he decided to offer 2 courses of lectures at Hackney College while he waited, one on philosophy and the other on chemistry. But Priestley proved to be nothing like the mighty eagle that Hazlitt had imagined. He had a prim, formal look, and when he opened his mouth he stammered, spoke thick, and huddled his words ungracefully together. Moreover, his whole manner was placid and indifferent, without any of that expression which arises either from the close workings of the passions or an intercourse with the world. In the summer of 1795, Hazlitt astonished his teachers and family by announcing that he could not follow his father into the ministry and that he was going to throw up his education at Hackney, having completed only 2 of 5 projected years. He had expected his time at college to be glittering and gay, but it had led to nothing but dejection and disappointment. A friend sought to comfort Mr. Hazlitt. "You have done everything in your power to make your son a wise and useful man," he said. "And may we not hope that he will be a wise and useful man in some other sphere of life?" But it did not seem very likely. Apart from a wild fantasy about becoming a painter, he had no idea of any career, and what was worse, he had a bee in his bonnet about politics, morality, and the association of ideas. He was convinced that there was something wrong with the modern philosophy, something out of joint, and he had only one ambition: to find it out and set it right.
William Hazlitt, Philosopher, was presented by Jonathan Ray and produced by Mark Whittaker. The reader was Russell Dixon, and it was a Square Dog radio production.